This is Icke of WeAreChange.org here with the man, the myth, the legend himself, David Icke. And as you know, you've been probably watching this YouTube channel for a while. We've been having many conversations throughout the years, and holy cow, has the political landscape changed so much. Now, obviously, people are going to say David Icke's a controversial figure. Well, we believe in having all voices and hearing all opinions, and David has been speaking a lot of interesting details, a lot of interesting facts for decades now, has been smeared by the mainstream media, and many times has been proven right on a lot of the predictions, a lot of the research, a lot of the analysis that you provide that was way beyond its time and way beyond even recognized by a lot of people. And this is why in this very specific video, I really wanted to get your take on what people are deeming this kind of new face of politics, the new kind of supposed leadership of the Democratic Party, and that, of course, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What are your thoughts and what's your analysis on this kind of new politician that people love to hate or everyone is just obsessing about?
Well, first of all, if you're not controversial in a world that's absolutely insane, then what are you doing? What are you doing? Imagine being acceptable in a world that's insane. I mean, so that's the starting point. If you're not controversial, then, might be worth asking why not. But you have brought up a very important subject, and I don't know how much tape there is, but I mean, I could talk about this for ages because there's so many aspects to it. Ocasio-Cortez is the personification and the natural outgrowth and consequence of what has been happening in American universities and colleges for so many years now. And not just there, of course. There is a process I've been observing for a long time, which is something will start often in terms of the progressive movement, shall we say, and I would go on to challenge shortly whether progressive means what it's supposed to mean. It starts in California, and then it moves across America, and then it moves across the Atlantic. So what we're now seeing, for instance, in British colleges and universities is exactly the same process. And it had to eventually produce an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because people, very simply, go through college and university, they add years to their age, and eventually they become adults, and what do? Enter politics. So she is basically the first wave, and ladies and gentlemen, it is a wave, of this progressive mentality, this extremist progressive mentality, which claims to be liberal, but is actually the very opposite of liberal. Liberals, true liberals, I'm not talking about political liberals, let's talk about the definition in the dictionary of liberal. It's basically someone who wants maximum liberty, maximum freedom, maximum right to choose their lifestyle, maximum freedom of speech and opinion. So I've already demolished the claims that this progressive mentality has for employing the word liberal to describe itself. It is the opposite of liberal. And you know, Luke, what's kind of stunningly ironic from someone who's lived, 66 years now, the speed at which the former liberal left that I grew up in, that I was a supporter of, how it's been hijacked at such a speed by the very opposite of everything it stood for. If Martin Luther King looked at Ocasio-Cortez and this whole progressive tyranny, he would probably weep. And yet, such is the self-deceit and self-deception that this anti-liberal progressive mentality sees itself as the modern-day civil rights movement. And just look at what it's saying. that basically the state authority, and not even that, billionaire-owned internet corporations. Do you remember when the liberal left was against billionaire corporations? Do you remember that? I still do, but I've got a good memory. And that these corporations and the state in general should dictate what people can say, what opinions they can have, and their right to express them and the right to have the means of circulating them. We now have this extraordinary alliance between the fake progressives, the fake liberals, and billionaire corporations, so that when people that the progressives don't like their opinion, when they are censored by these corporations, the progressive mentality starts breaking into applause and cheers. Now, the original, true, as opposed to Alexandria, fake liberal left, would have been in the streets. You know, I remember as a kid in the 60s, seeing on a black and white television, seeing the students at Berkeley going out on protests demanding freedom of speech. Now there are protests to delete freedom of speech. Now some things happened here, and the truly liberal left has been hijacked and has been replaced by something that I would have called, and I will still call, but I would have called years ago, the far right. Because if you look at the classic example of the far right, the Nazis, but you look at Stalin, you look at any tyranny, what's the first thing they want when they get control of power? They want to delete all opinion and all information that would get people to see them in a light they don't want to be seen. So when people were trying to expose the Nazis in Germany, they shut them down. They banned their public meetings. They burned their books. And the same with Stalin, the same with all tyrannies. So here we have the fake liberal left that's hijacked the Democratic Party with billionaire money from people like George Soros, I'll come to him in a second, who are employing and demanding the same responses to alternative opinion that the Nazis used and that Stalin used. Silence them, shut them down, ban them. And they are so permanently located up their own backsides, it's too dark to see anything. And thus they are so lacking self-awareness, they cannot actually see that the way they're behaving and the world they're demanding is introduced is the same world that they rail against. You're a Nazi. Are you against being a Nazi? Yeah. Well, why are you acting like one then, mate? Eh? But, you know, tyrannies are tyrannies. You can call them Nazi, you can call them Stalinist, you can call them Marxist. But they're still tyrannies, and because they're tyrannies, they use the techniques of tyranny and the currency of control of tyranny, which is always based on censorship. And when I look at Ocasio-Cortez and what she represents, and when I see that Michael Moore calls for her to be leader, it just gives me more confirmation that she needs to be very carefully looked at, as does Michael Moore. But when you look at Marxism, first of all, Karl Marx was the banker's boy. You know, he wasn't some guy fighting for justice, for the for the working class. He was the banker's guy. And think about it this way. The goal of the few, what people refer to these days as the 1%, is control. It's global control. It's centralized control. And why centralized control? Because it has to be. When you are a few and you want to control everyone else, you have to centralize decision making. The more diversity of decision making you have, the less power any central cabal is going to have. Now, there are two main ways that you can secure that power at the center. One is to accumulate the vast majority of the wealth, and through that own governments and own the means of control that way, which is the capitalist, as it's called, way of doing it. But there is another way of doing it with the same banking 1% class in control, and that is to sell a structure of society on the basis of government of the people. We represent the workers, we do. And you sell it as a people's revolution. And what you do is you create a structure of control where the whole society is a hierarchy of top-down control, as we saw in communist Russia and we see in communist China. And the few then sit at the center of that structure and control everything. Does anyone think that Stalin was running Russia, Soviet Union, for the working class of Russia? Does anyone think that the hierarchy in China are running China for the working class of China? I mean, do me a bloody favour. But it was sold as a revolution of the people. So how does Marxism work? Because Marxism is basically what this is all structured on. Well, of course, the classic expression of Marxism was struggle. The class struggle. And basically, what that's founded on is transforming society through conflict between groups. That way, conflict between classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and what have you. What we're seeing now with Ocasio-Cortez, I'm not just pointing at her, she's become the face, I'm talking about the mentality she represents, is the class struggle transforming, but the same structure, the same means, the same goals, into the self-identity struggle. Now, to do that, what you have to do is form groups of self-identity. What you absolutely must never do, or Marxism's gonna just collapse, is you must never treat individuals as individuals, irrespective of their color, religion, culture, income bracket. You must never treat anyone as an individual. You must never look at people by their individual behavior, because if you do, these groups that you want to play off against each other in the self-identity struggle of Marxism, modern Marxism, collapses. Because whether you are white, black, or orange with blue spots, I'm not going to judge you by the color of your skin, or your background, or your income bracket, or any of it. I'm going to look at your behavior. And if you're a white man who's a psychopath, I'm going to call you out as a psychopath. And if you are a black man who's a psychopath, I'm going to call you out as a psychopath. And you, whatever you are, if you're a psychopath, I'm going to call you out as a psychopath. You're not a white psychopath and a black psychopath and a, I don't know, Hindu psychopath. You're a bloody psychopath. This is what happens when you look at people as individuals. But it don't work in Marxism, because it's all based on playing groups off against each other, creating conflict, which then transforms society in the way that you want it. And look at what's happened. You know, I've been really talking till my throat goes sore, really, over the years about the obsession that we have with labels. Instead of being consciousness, having an experience, we have to be not only externally labeled, we have to label ourselves. I call them I am R's. So I am R this, I am R that. So you start out with I am R man, I am R woman, I am R white, I am R black. But these I am R's are now being subdivided into more and more minutiae of self-identity, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Who are you? I don't know. I'll have a look. Leave magnifying glass out. Oh, that's who I am. And so what you have is more self-identities to play off against each other in the Marxist self-identity struggle. So now we have got to the point, Luke, where feminists are having big rucks and arguments with transgender. For instance, people in big strapping male bodies who self-identify as a woman taking part in women's sport. Who do you think is going to win the weightlifting? You know what I mean? So now women are going, hold on, even on that level, hold on a minute. Our sport's being destroyed. Women can't win this event anymore. And what do you have there? Conflict between self-identities. Classic Marxism. And and the other point about all this is that what Nazis and Marxists and communists, whatever you want to call them, what tyrannies always do, is if there's a debate, they can't win, don't have it, shut it down. And so what we're seeing now with this fake progressive, fake liberal mentality that's actually put the Democratic Party to the right of the Republican Party, if that's possible. They just haven't got the self-awareness to see it. What we're seeing is wherever there's a debate that they can't win, shut it down. And you shut it down by labeling anyone who has a different opinion beyond the one you want to impose as a Nazi, a sexist, a misogynist, or whatever. So we have reached the point in shutting down the debate in absolute classic Marxist Nazi style. Even the question of whether men and women are biologically different, I mean, all I'd say, ladies and gentlemen, is find yourself a mirror. Have a look. And you might realize there is some biological difference, you know what I mean? But what did Orwell talk about? He talked about creating a society of 1984 in which the population had to accept that 2 and 2 equaled 5. What is it? How can it be perfectly described when you have professors of biology being castigated, even being fired for saying that men and women are biologically different? What that's saying, and it's not just about targeting one professor, it's about saying to all the other professors and everyone else in academia and everyone else beyond academia, this is what happens if you don't do what we say. And then you go into the most insidious type of censorship, self-censorship. People just stop saying it because they're intimidated. And so how better can it be described than you cannot have an opinion that men and women are different other than to say you can no longer say 2 and 2 equals 4. You've got to accept it equals 5. This Orwellian society is absolutely in our face. And I'll say this to their face, this progressive, self-obsessed mob. You are everything you claim not to be. You are using the techniques of fascism, of Marxism, of tyranny to impose a society which you have actually been programmed to believe in by years and years of incessant perceptual programming, not least through the schools and the universities and the colleges. And you are going to have to live in the tyranny that you are creating. And I tell you what, your kids are going to have to live even more fiercely in the tyranny that you are creating. Because you don't know what you are creating. What you're doing with your virtue signaling, with your, oh, look at me, I'm ever so nice. Look at me, I'm a much nicer person than you. Look at the art on my sleeve. What you're doing in your self-obsession is enforcing a system of control, of perceptual control, of opinion control, that you are eventually at some point, the penny's going to drop, that it's now being applied to you and your kids, and you're going to go, oh my God, what was I doing? What was I thinking? Wake the hell up while you still can.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. Personally, when looking at everything that's happening in our political discourse, what I think is happening is people are just trying to be as divided and conquered as possible, and they're trying to make you identify, as you were talking about, with your race, with your ethnicity, with your beliefs, so you could have kind of this gang fights, and I kind of refuse to do it because it's really, really dirty, and ultimately I don't see this as a left and right, as a white or black, as a Muslim, Christian thing. It's a top-down thing, which you've been talking about for decades and warning about, and I think we're really at the precipice right now with this kind of identity politics that is ruining political discourse. And of course, let's just be honest here, one side is being promoted while one side is being shut down. Yeah. And one thing that I wanted to ask you before even getting into DARPA and getting into some of the bigger aspects of this, because we could get into the deeper levels here, they don't care about your identity. They don't care about your race or religion. They care about power, and that's pretty clear. Even just recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it came out, a journalist revealed that her boyfriend is working on her staff, being paid by her staff. The journalist that broke that has been suspended by Twitter. Saudi Arabia has a big investment in Twitter. DARPA and all these other larger institutions and seed funding organizations, there's a lot of shady money. And as you brought up in your talks yesterday, do you really think that these CEOs have a lot of power? And Mark Zuckerberg, I think you made the perfect case for. But let's just continue this conversation in this bigger kind of technocratic kind of power grab, because it's really, really terrifying to see the technological advancements and the possibilities that are happening. Of course, one side that is winning is cheering on this censorship, but really we're talking about serious things. We're already seeing it in China. Where do you see it going from here?
Well, just on the point of the billionaires and the extraordinary alliance between billionaires and the fake liberal progressive left. Of course, one of the people that has massively funded the left to the tune of tens of billions is George Soros. George Soros is the man who said that he doesn't take any he doesn't care, basically, about the social consequences of what he does. He's just there to make money. And I would say to these progressive people who take his money, and the unbelievable list of so-called progressive organizations he funds, why do you think that someone like George Soros, with that attitude, I don't take into account the social consequences of what I do, I'm just there to make money. Why do you think someone with that mentality would want to be funding the left? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if you want to control the outcome, you have to control both sides. It's no good controlling one side, you'll influence the outcome. You need to control both sides. So what we have is the same cabal funding the left and absolutely hijacking the traditional liberal left and turning it into a fascistic left, and the same cabal funding people like um, like Trump and the Republicans. And in that way, you control both sides, you control the game. And this is what's going on. And again, if the progressive mentality wants to, sort of invest itself in a bit of self-awareness, it might just ask itself why it finds itself on the same side as billionaires. You see, the centralization of power in Silicon Valley, or through Silicon Valley, as you indicate in your question, Luke, Silicon Valley is a vehicle. It's not a starting point. It's not an origin, which we'll get into in a sec. But it has so centralized power and thus centralized wealth that these Silicon Valley billionaires and all the others, the banking billionaires, a handful of them now own the equivalent wealth of the poorest half of the world population. So why on earth would you, as a so-called for the people liberal, be on the same side as people who are so contemptuous of the poorest people in the world, who are so exploitative of the poorest people in the world, not least in the way they make their products often, that you would be on the same side as people who, a handful of whom, now own the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of the population. The whole thing makes no sense. And to come to your the thrust of your question here, if you want to stop people seeing the pattern and the direction that we're moving in so fast, then you need to give them other things to focus their attention on. And what has happened since Trump came to power? And the pro-Trump people, we had a conversation before Trump was elected in which I was saying this, that Trump's coming to power because he's being brought to power. Why? Because he represents a certain figure, a certain personality that you can use as an anchor and as a symbol of a political position. So what do they call him right from the start? He's a Nazi, he's far right, he's a dictator. And that Trump has been used as planned to create this hate figure on which the left can focus and thus be turned into this progressive fascistic mob that it's now become. And people, not just in America, but in Britain too and other countries, who are still of that genuine liberal left mentality, it must be a nightmare trying to operate in that arena. Now it's been hijacked by people who are anything but. And so you now have what was planned all along is basically an unbelievably divided America. And so the focus is, look at the media, look at CNN. Oh my God, CNN, claptrap, no news. And it's all, are you for Trump? Are you against Trump? Are you for Trump? Are you against Trump? And then, can I just have a look? Oh, look, what's happening in Silicon Valley? The world's being taken over. It's all a diversion. So if we do peer beyond the smoke screens, we'll start to see what's happening in Silicon Valley and through Silicon Valley. Imagine that you are the military intelligence complex, which is the vehicle of this cabal, this global cabal, I expose. What do you want? Number one, you want 24/7 surveillance of the population in real time. Okay? Well, Amazon, tick, Facebook, tick, Google, tick, and so it goes on. Twitter, tick. All these, platform ticks. You then also want, number two, to be able to control, eventually, in totality, everything that people see and don't see. And where do people get their perceptions from? Well, let's go back one more stage. Where do people get their behavior from? Where do they get their behavior from? Their perceptions. Where do they get their perceptions from? Information received. So if you can control the information, you're controlling perception, so you're controlling behavior. And as the internet has become more and more the focal point of information, the more you can control the internet and censor what information circulates and doesn't circulate, the more you are controlling information received, which dictates perception, which dictates behavior. So this is what's happening. Of course, once you've got it on the internet, because of algorithms, you can censor things through artificial intelligence without even a human input once the codes are in. So tick, in terms of control of information, tick Facebook, tick Google, tick Twitter, tick Amazon and all these others. Then number three, and I've been, of course, writing about this for a long time, number three, you want to create a situation where you replace the human mind with artificial intelligence by connecting the human brain mind to artificial intelligence. And, you know, this is not me pulling this out of the ether. Oh, that David Icke, he's so controversial. Well, you know, look at Google executives like Ray Kurzweil, for goodness sake, who are openly talking about this. You know, people might not realize, because they think that Google's a search engine, Facebook's a social media platform, Amazon is a retail website. These are at the cutting edge of the technological, quote, revolution that includes AI and connecting AI to the human brain and the human body. And so in Silicon Valley, you have everything in these corporations that the Pentagon, military, intelligence, industrial, political complex would want. And if they didn't exist, these corporations, and if Silicon Valley didn't exist, well, that complex would have to invent them. I say, and I've been saying a long time, they did. And so while, you know, one of the great ways that this tyranny is ushered in is by buying time within which there are so many diversions that by the time people see it in any number, it's a done deal. So I'll give you a classic example of this. In Israel, you've got the story since the occupation of the West Bank, etc., where we've had talks, then we've had roadmaps, then we've had talks about roadmaps, and then we've had constant, we've had Oslo Accords, we've had this, we've had that, we've had the other. And all of it's been buying time, because while that's been going on, talks about talks and roadmaps, the West Bank is being more and more built upon by Jewish-only settlements, right? So they've been buying time to finish the job, and now we've reached the point where there's so many settlements in the occupied lands of Palestine that anyone who says they believe in a two-state solution, I mean, you're having a laugh, mate. There aren't two states. They've been built on. And the same's happening with this whole Silicon Valley thing. You know, there's all these diversions, Trump, hate Trump, love Trump, and so many others. And all the latest technology. Oh, yeah, well, you've got 5G now. Oh, yeah, it's going to fry you, but it's great. You'll be able to download your movies in seconds. And all these things, and all the time, well, people are looking the other way. It's tick, 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 tick towards this point, which Kurzweil talks about 2030, when artificial intelligence gets connected to the human mind, at which point artificial intelligence becomes the human mind. So what's the next step? Who controls artificial intelligence? Controls the human collective mind. and the hardware, the technology, the means to do it is incessantly tick, tick, tick being put into place. Thousands and thousands of satellites being put up to beam Wi-Fi, 5G Wi-Fi at the Earth to make this technological control system possible. 5G being brought in with no testing, although they know the effect, that's why they're not having any tests. What do you mean? We're going to have this publicly tested? Have you any idea what they'll find out this stuff does? We all know it's the same thing. If you can't win the debate, and if 5G was properly tested, it's a debate they can't win, just don't have the debate, don't do the testing. It's so simple. And this technological control system, this technological perceptual prison to replace the human mind as we know it, is unfolding second by second, while Ocasio-Cortez is wondering about the world going to end in 12 years or something. Madness, madness. What, Alexandria, look at the history of the climate change hoax. Look at the background history to an organization called the Club of Rome, set up in the 60s, specifically to use the environment as an excuse to transform global society. Look at something called Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is being played out to transform global society through the United Nations. And what you'll find is that this centralized, fascistic, Marxist, whatever term you want, tyranny, called Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, is proposing to introduce, and has been for a long time, exactly what you're proposing in your new Green Deal. Because you are someone who's completely oblivious of how you're being played like a stringed instrument. Well, you can be, but some of us aren't.
I think the bigger point that I kind of wanted to make here is that we're living in a strange place where if you question reality, if you question your authority, you're controversial. You're called fake news. You're attacked. You're censored. Meanwhile, people who are literally dropping bombs on people, profiting off their misery, selling them pharmaceutical drugs, doing awful things, imprisoning people for not hurting anyone. Those people, they're just advertisers. They're supported. They're pushed. They're authoritative voices that literally cause conflict and so much human suffering. And questioning those people, no. You're fake news and you're controversial and you need to be attacked and you need to be shut down, which you've been facing for decades, of course. One thing that I kind of wanted to kind of segue here is, before we get into your movie and all that, is there kind of a solution? Because I mean, we're seeing the problems. We're seeing the divide and conquer happening. We're seeing, like you talked about in your lecture yesterday about typhus being amongst the homeless population in LA. I was even in Tijuana recently, and I saw so much disease, pain, and suffering from individuals who were just tricked and fooled and told, hey, come up here in a caravan to the United States. There's jobs and money for you. And these people didn't even know what asylum was, didn't even know what they were getting themselves into. So much human suffering. How do we kind of transcend that? How do we move away from that? What are some of the kind of viable options and solutions that you think people should move forward with?
Well, I've said for a long time, we don't need solutions. We need to remove the cause of the problem. Hello? And first of all, the cause of the problem of human control and human suffering, which comes from human control, is centralization of power. See, every time you centralize power another step, you give fewer people more control over more people. And let's just look at, and you people who read my books will see that this is not a new phenomenon. We've been moving in this direction. Okay, we're closing in on the end game now, but we've been moving in this direction for a very long time. There was a point, of course, when people organized themselves in tribes, and the tribe decided what happened in the tribe. And it was a much closer association. You know, people who were um, making decisions or influence decisions, the people influenced by the decisions, they could look him in the eye. And then there came this pivotal point where the tribes were brought together, lots of tribes were brought together to form what we call nations. Now, the few people at the center of the nation are now dictating to all the people of the former tribes. So we've had a massive centralization of power. What we have then seen, not least through the European Union, but not just through that, through trade agreements and trade areas and centralization of power, for instance, in Silicon Valley over so much, including information. We've seen a point where nations are being brought together under the next level of centralized control. So the governments of nations now, they have nothing like the power that internet corporations in Silicon Valley have, for instance. They don't have the power that the George Soroses have. They don't have the power that the Sheldon Adelsons have, funding Trump and the Republicans. So we've now reached this next level of a few people dictating to all the nations and therefore all the former tribes. And what we've seen is the people calling the shots of people's lives getting fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. And what a coincidence that, you know, what people like me and you and others have been warning about, me for 30 bloody years, is that the goal is to create a world government dictating to the whole of humanity, a world central bank controlling all global finance, a world army imposing the will of the world government, and that's planned to be overwhelmingly NATO becoming a world army. And by the way, back in the 1990s, in books I said that the other part of this world army plan was the creation of a European army. And now, this year, we've had Merkel in Germany and Macron in France coming out as if it's spontaneous. Oh, we think there should be a European army. And it's been the plan all along. You know it. So the other thing I've been talking about all these years, as part of this world structure, is, and this was laughed at back in the 90s, connecting humanity to a global computer system through microchips. Well, you know, never mind the nano microchips that exist. The microchips you can see, it started. You know, I spoke in Sweden a few months ago. 3,000 people have been microchipped in Sweden so far, and counting. There was a story a few weeks ago in Britain where trade unions and the employers' organisation were saying, well, hold on a minute. What are these plans that companies are putting together to microchip their workers? You know, and you know what's funny, Luke, in a kind of kind of ironic fashion, is how people have hurled this thing at me over 30 years. You're mad. You're crazy. It's ridiculous. And yet, the things that were in my books in the 1990s are now being read on the television news. And then you say something else now, and they go, oh, that's mad, that's ridiculous. When actually, what they don't do is stop and say, hold on a minute, what that bloke said, it's kind of happened. Now, that is not to say, oh, look at me, how good I am. The fact that I could say it and write it in the 1990s, and it's happening now, that tells you something very, very important. It ain't happening randomly. How could George Orwell be so accurate in a book written in 1948? How could Aldous Huxley be so accurate with Brave New World in a book written in 1932? Because there are two worlds. There's the one that most people are aware of, and there's the other world that's manipulating this. And the two worlds do not have the same level of knowledge. And one of the things I've been writing over the years, it's worth mentioning here again. I say and this goes into deeper levels of it, and what is ultimately behind it all, that the technology that comes out as the next greatest thing, whether it's 5G or this piece of technology or whatever, once we see it in the public arena, it's already existed, possibly often for decades. You know, I quote people in my books who were insiders of this cabal, who were saying that this is how the world is going to be basically controlled, and it was with technology which at that time didn't even exist. How could Orwell talk about telescreens so accurately, where your television is able to see you and record you in your own front room? Smart TVs, anybody? Because there is, if you can access this other world and its agenda, you can predict the future for a very simple reason. Unless there's an intervention into that agenda, and my God, that's the whole point of what we do, then it's going to happen. And the idea is not to predict the future. And people say, oh yeah, he was right about that. Oh, that's good. No. The whole idea is for it not to happen. Not to get applause because it has happened and you predicted it years ago. It's to say, look, this is the plan. Unless there's an intervention, it's going to happen. If it happens, I don't see that as a successful prediction. I see that as a failure of intervention. Because we don't want it to happen, that's the point. And, we do really need to just put the labels down. This is the other area. They clearly want to divide and rule us on the grounds of self-identity and self-identity groups. Self-identity groups where no one is judged individually, they're judged on the basis of their group. So if you are white, you are a privileged white supremacist. Those sleeping the streets in LA who are white, privileged, forget about that. No, white, privileged. You can say anything about that. Doesn't matter. Other groups, you can't say anything about. I mean, take the Jewish group. You can't say anything about anyone who's Jewish because you're an anti-Semite by reflex action, and it's getting more and more extreme. So, people like me can expose what George Soros is doing and what his tens of billions are doing to manipulate countries. They can quote leaked documents, etc., and leak emails from his network proving it. You're not exposing George Soros because he's manipulating global society. You're doing it because you're an anti-Semite. And this is the defense mechanism. I call it the protection racket. But it's not just the Jewish example. It's many other examples where what are they doing? They're shutting down the debate. So we can't have a debate. Well, we bloody will. Watch me. We can't have a debate about George Soros because we're going to shut it down because you're only exposing him because he's Jewish. Or you're only saying this about this person because he's so-and-so or she's so-and-so. It's like you're only saying that because I'm transgender. No, I'm saying that because you're talking bollocks. Your self-identity means nothing to me. It's entirely your responsibility. It's entirely your right to decide to be whatever you want to be. It's none of my business. Just don't make it my business by telling me that I have to live my life in accordance with how you want to live yours. You want to be transgender? Go ahead. You want me to do this or do that as a because of it? Well, if I feel not to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not asking you to change your life and change the way you speak and change the words you use to facilitate me. That would be arrogance beyond belief. So don't do it to me. And another part of the solution, or removing the cause of the problem, more to the point, is to stop conceding to this nonsense. When people say you can't say that, you say it louder. Because if we don't, there's going to be no freedom left. Because if you concede and you concede and you concede through intimidation and self-censorship what you are going to say, because this person's offended by that and offended by that and offended by that and she's offended by that and he's offended by that. Eventually, you feel something on your back and it's a wall and there's no further retreat necessary or possible because you've reached that point where you never say anything that is not in line with what the state, the system, the mob insists that you say. And so it's vital that people keep speaking their truth and don't be intimidated into silence. That'll be the bloody day, I'll tell you.
I think a big important aspect of this, and I totally agree with you when it comes to the problems of kind of centralization, because if you are kind of a central controller, you would want to play off people's worst kind of psychological, emotional behaviors against each other. You would want people to hate each other. You want people fighting each other. So you wouldn't be able to look and see, hey, we're pretty much all on this planet together experiencing this consciousness. We're all, brothers and sisters, no matter our differences, we're all here together. Let's make sure we take care of each other. And the only way a system could exist, really, on this kind of... I think some rulers even see it as a plantation, as a farm. The only way they could exist if they have everyone in their little boxes against each other. And I don't really see... I think hate is one of their biggest weapons, and they manufacture it. They manipulate us, and they use our own psychological weaknesses to push us towards that. And I think identities are one way of doing that. But when you were talking about this kind of consciousness, and we could jump into this issue or we could skip it, but I would want to, we had a different conversation about kind of ayahuasca and DMT. There's a radio host saying right now that ayahuasca and DMT are pushed by the CIA, as like they did in the hippies movement, to make you connected to demonic entities. And personally, when it comes to a lot of individual experiences that, I had myself, we kind of had a similar one where we talked about it before. It was very eye-opening. It was very seeing. But I'm kind of questioning if it's, the right thing to kind of open up, whether we're supposed to know or not know, and if this is even kind of the two worlds that you were talking about before. Do you kind of see it that way? Because it kind of makes me question this kind of bigger kind of spirituality thing, and if it's, the right thing to do. Because on one hand, you have people saying it's bad, it's demonic entities. On the second hand, you're having people having incredible experiences that change their lives for the better, and they're completely changed human beings who aren't filled with hate anymore, who aren't filled with fear anymore because of it. So there's kind of a duopoly here, and I kind of wanted to get your kind of stance on this bigger debate of the kind of psychedelics and the kind of CIA, the bigger aspects of this. What's your take on it?
One word, frequency. Everything's a frequency. We live in a band of frequency. We think we live in a world. We don't. We live in a world as people perceive it. It's a band of frequency. It's the frequency that our senses can decode into this reality, and it's tiny. As I've said many times before, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists. Some say it's a bit more in science, but not much. Tiny. And visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see visually, the world of the seen is within visible light, is a smear of the 0.005%. So basically humans are blind. So I say, it's another story, another day, but I say that is not an accident. That's been manipulated in the distant, what we call past, so that we only decode a tiny band of frequency, and basically it's a frequency prison. Anyway, if you focus only on the and perceive basically only the five sense world of the seen, you're actually only interacting in a conscious way with a smear of 0.005%. And of course, they have shown in more recent times that there is something called brain placidity. They thought for a long time that once the brain was formed, then that was it. Now they know it's anything but it. And that the brain is constantly changing the way it decodes information, processes information, on the basis of the information it receives. Now, just as a very quick aside, in a ridiculously short time. I mean, in evolutionary terms, 0.000000001 of a second. This technology's come in, this smart technology, and it has given the human brain a informational input, electrically and digitally, which it's never had before. And this is why it's so affecting people. It's so affecting the kids and the way they think, and the suicides and the depression and the influence on kids. It's changing the way their brains process information. What is depression? It's information processed into depression, and a perception of depression. That's what it is. So the brain, if you focus only on the five senses and the world of the five senses, is going to basically wire itself through neuron networks to process information within that band of frequency. And you're not really going to be aware of anything else. What is happening to lots of people, more and more than I've ever known, and gathering all the time, is that there is some kind of awakening going on. And as your perceptions awaken and you start to question, you start to see things you couldn't see before, this process of brain placidity is changing the way the brain processes information. So you start processing it a different way. So you start to perceive the world very differently to how you did before, when the brain was just decoding five sense information. So if we go to the ayahuasca stuff, I only took it once. I had a fantastic experience, unbelievable. Done 2 nights in Brazil in the rainforest. That opens up parts of the brain to access levels of reality that are beyond the five sense realm. But what does it open to? You know, I've said about ayahuasca and all these kind of drugs, they don't take you to somewhere else. They take you to where you already are, but a different level of it. So if you're in a real low frequency, depressed, dark, as you might call it, state, and you take this stuff, then you'll go to a frequency expression beyond the world of the scene that relates to where you are. So if you are in a more high frequency state when you take this stuff, it will take you to a high frequency state. And so some people will have, they will have demonic experiences. And other people will have, paradise experiences. Because it takes you to where you already are. And this, of course, is very important when we talk about death, when our consciousness, our awareness leaves the body at death. It's a great line, great saying I came across years ago. Death is no cure for ignorance. Because your frequency state doesn't suddenly change when you withdraw from the body. It's that frequency state. So, you know, where we move on to is dictated by a frequency state. And what is our frequency state dictated by? Perception. Perception. So, because your perceptions are frequencies. Hate is a frequency. It's a very dense, low frequency. Fear is a dense, low frequency. And the more that this cabal manipulating global society can keep the target population in a low frequency state, well, what is it not doing in those low frequency states? It's not accessing high frequency states where people would get an insight beyond the program. So it's a prison. A low frequency state is literally a frequency prison because you can't perceive beyond it. So they want people fighting. They want people in depression. They want people who are in a state of hate. And on that subject, by the way, have you seen the face on some of these anti-haters? Full of hate. I'm from Antifa. I'm against hate. What? Talk about projection. The hate on their face is unbelievable. Where they talk about anti-hate. Because they don't have the self-awareness to actually say, mirror, it's me, innit? Yeah. If you don't look in the mirror, someone else is always to blame. And so it's it's very simple in terms of these psychoactive drugs, is that they open you up. What they open you up to is down to where you're at, and that's why you have the difference. And I'm not advocating people take the stuff. I'm not advocating they don't. It's an absolute personal choice, none of my business.
And there's been many scientific kind of research, experiments and documents showing the kind of frequency of hate and how it's dictated by our mental wavelengths. Now,
there's another point, actually, Luke, which I mentioned in the talk yesterday. It's a two-way process. The brain processes information. And as you were saying, these different states of being are represented by frequency. If you can fire the frequency of, say, rage across a community, you can get people into because all the brain's doing is picking up the frequencies. A lot of the frequencies within the band that the brain operates on, it will process that frequency, and it will manifest what that frequency represents. In this case, rage. So you're pounding this frequency out across a community, and now they're in a state of rage. They don't know why they are, and they might even not be aware that they're in a state of rage, but it's there, just waiting. You need just an incident to light the firework, and the rage expresses itself. You can have a riot, crazy riot, where people are doing things that they wouldn't normally do, and people they'll have to join Naivety Anonymous if they don't think that they don't believe that's happening. It's happening all the time. They worked out the frequencies a long time ago.
You said before something that resonated with me. It's a simple choice: fear or love, and I think that choice is becoming very, very apparent. Personally, I mean, we talked about this in a separate video. When I did DMT, I got the message and expression of love and had a good positive experience. But thank you for kind of breaking it down that way, because it is kind of a conundrum. Because I have been not really talking about it or advocating for it, because, as you said, some people have very negative experiences on it because of where they're at, and I think it's
a quick thing on that. When I had my ayahuasca experience, in the room, same night, someone was having a nightmare on the same experience.
And just like anything, it could be something that could be awakening and beautiful and amazing, or it could be extremely destructive as well. And again, I'm happy you broke that down, because it was something that I was in my head. I was having a hard time understanding, and I think on an individual basis, it's a very personal one that you as an individual have to take yourself. And I've stopped kind of advocating it. I stopped kind of promoting it or talking about it even because of this bigger conundrum. But having more understanding of it is extremely important, and that's why. Thank you for helping me understand that, and thank you so much for an hour now, over an hour. I was like, yeah, we'll do 10 minutes. We're at an hour right now, and thank you so much for the information, the download. I kind of want to leave talking about, you have a film coming out called Renegade. You're doing a premiere in New York. I think the movie's coming out in May. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just finish off. Tell us about your film. Where can people watch it, and where can people find you?
Well, davidicke.com, you find everything. But yeah, this film came out of nowhere. The offer of it came out of nowhere. It was filmed in 4 countries, Jay, wasn't it? In 4 countries over a period of 8 months, and it was put together very quickly. I'm very happy with it. It's the story of my life, but that's kind of a theme. But the thing about it's absolutely packed with information about the world and manipulation of the world that people wouldn't normally see. And the idea is to have a production, a movie that will introduce a hell of a lot more people to these concepts that otherwise they wouldn't see. So at the end of March, there's a premiere in Los Angeles, which people can have tickets for. There's a premiere in New York. We're doing one in Toronto, and then going to Britain and doing one in London and one in Manchester in early April. And people go to davidicke.com, they'll be able to get all the details. But I just want to say this before we finish. You know, people talk about love and hate and stuff like that, and there is this kind of very one-dimensional view of it, which is love is, oh, I love you, oh yeah, and hate is, you know, criticizing someone. But it's not black and white like that. You know, when I was talking about progressives and I was talking about Ocasio-Cortez and stuff like that, I don't have any animosity to any of them. I have no hatred of them. I have no animosity to them. I passionately care about the world that they are overwhelmingly, unknowingly being used as pawns to bring in. But I don't have any animosity to them. I'm saying what I'm saying, doing what I'm doing, actually because I care. I care about the world that they, as well as my own children and family, but they and their kids are going to have to live in. And I'm 67 in April. I know I don't look it, Luke. I mean, but I am, and I'm not doing this for me. I'm not trying to alert people to what's going on and how they're being used as pawns and how they're being manipulated, because it's good for my future and it suits me in my future. These people are going to be around much longer than I am. I mean, I ain't going for a long time yet, but much longer than I am. They're the ones I'm doing it for, because I don't want to see anyone live in a tyranny. I don't want to see little kids I'm looking at now, including my own grandchildren. I don't want to look at them and think, my God, what a nightmare world you're going to live in, kids. I want to do something about it. And if that means upsetting a few people by saying what they don't want to hear, well, so be it. What these young generations today are going to have to experience, unless we sort this out, is far more important to me than abuse. I've been taking abuse for 30 years, in one ear and out the other. I mean, you are wasting your time if you think abuse is going to affect me. So love takes many forms, and sometimes love is taking abuse for 30 years, trying to alert people who are abusing you of the world they're going to live in, unless they see through the lies and see through the smokescreen of deceit.
I think that's very well encapsulated in all your work for decades now, and I think that's a very important lesson that a lot of people should understand, because you do see Ocasio-Cortez, you do see a lot of these people. They're all kind of well-meaning, they are sympathetic, but ultimately they're falling into a bigger trap, and I think it's up to all of us to wake ourselves up, open ourselves up to different potentials and possibilities and perceptions out there, and you've done a tremendous job doing that for a lot of people. So thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it. I know you're here in Acapulco of all places, an hour long. I thought this was going to go for 10 minutes. Incredible.
Mate, it never goes for 10 minutes. Actually, the last time we spoke, it was a beautiful seascape on the Isle of Wight, and now it's a beautiful seascape in Mexico.
We'll turn it over here so you guys could see it. And thank you for being a part of this ride and watching independent media. And if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to share it with your friends and family members. And wow, thank you for that huge information download.